Imagine with me for a moment that you are a detective and you've just arrived at a village in Mozambique, Africa. Now, at the center of the village lies a water pump, but it's not like any water pump you've ever seen in your life. As you look a little closer, you can see that it's combined with a children's merry-go-round. And you see how it's supposed to work. The children will grab onto the outside metal ring of the structure, and as they turn and spin and play, water pumps out of a nearby faucet. How creative and innovative, you think to yourself, combining children's play with access to clean water. But something isn't quite right here. There are no children around, no children playing on the roundabout. And as you look a little closer, you see it's broken down and collecting dust and rust. Now, as you go from one village to the next, it's the same story everywhere you go. Broken down water pumps in the center of the village. And it's becoming clear to you that the people these water pumps were meant to help, the villagers, they're not being helped at all. So, as a detective, we're wondering what went wrong here. Now, the mystery that I just presented you with is based on the real-life story of an organization called Play Pumps. In the early 2000s, an entrepreneur from the UK visited Southern Africa and felt so compelled by the water crisis that he wanted to do something about it. So he teamed up with a friend who was an engineer, and together they patented the Play Pump. You can see how it's supposed to work. The kids grab onto the outside and they spin and play, and water comes out of a nearby faucet. Now, when this idea first came out over 20 years ago, it took the world's imagination by storm. Millions of dollars were poured into scaling and growing this project rapidly, from foundations and philanthropists and even celebrities who hosted benefit concerts. So the project scaled quickly, and play pumps were installed in villages across southern Africa. And things seemed to be going really well for a while, until they weren't. So a couple years into the project, children stopped playing on the play pumps. Sometimes they would break down and sit rusting in the middle of villages. And looking back today, the story of play pumps is largely considered a cautionary tale in the world of philanthropy. Now, as a detective on the play pumps case, what questions would you ask to figure out how all this went wrong? Well, first you might ask, are children really the best operators of the entire village's water system? Or I can frame it another way. Let me ask you this. When a kid is given a toy, do they consistently play with it for weeks and months and years? No. So the kids were getting bored of playing on the play pumps and soon abandoned them, which meant that to get water for the village, the matriarchs of the village, often elderly women, had to come out, stop the important things they were doing, and crank the thing manually just to get water out. What other questions would we ask as detectives on the play pumps case? Well, we might ask, what happens when one of these things breaks down? Well, it turns out that in their effort to scale the project as quickly as possible, the play pumps team had failed to train people on the ground to repair the structures. So when they broke, they often stayed broke. Another question we might ask as detectives on the play pumps case is probably the most important question of all, and that is, did these villages even want the play pumps? I'm thinking you might be able to guess where I'm going with this. But a PBS investigation a couple years into the project found, by interviewing the leaders in the villages, that many of them hadn't even wanted the play pumps at all. they'd just been installed there without buy-in. Now, I just want you to imagine for a moment someone rolling up to your door, knocking on it, and dropping off a giant piece of equipment that you didn't order and you didn't ask for, and then piecing out, leaving you to deal with it. The Play Pumps project is important because we can take these questions and we can ask ourselves, what if we could go back in time? What if we were able to ask these questions before the project even launched? What might be different today? Would the estimated 2 billion people around the globe who don't have access to clean water have access? This story illustrates that there's one skill that is critical to cultivate as changemakers, and it's the most underrated skill that we can imagine. It is very simply asking questions. Now, my own journey asking questions started right here at NC State many years ago. You see, throughout high school, I had a dream of having a career that would make an impact, but I didn't really know what that was going to look like. So when I got to NC State, I actually started out as an English major, switched to poli-sci about a year in, and nothing was really fitting. Nothing quite felt right. So feeling frustrated, I went to a college advisor who told me I should try something I hadn't thought about before, which is instead of thinking about what job or career I wanted to have, what if I thought about what questions I wanted to answer during my time here at NC State? And so I thought of two big questions. The first was, how does social change happen? When we see these big movements in the news and in our history books, what's going on under the surface? What are the mechanisms causing those things to succeed? I had to know. The second question was, what are the skills and the traits of the people who make that social change happen? So I took these two questions back to my advisor, and they taught me how to do something I didn't even know I was allowed to do, which was create my own major. And so I did exactly that. I curated courses across the spectrum from history to political science to sociology to nonprofit leadership and especially communications, because being able to talk about your cause is a critical skill in this work. And I called the major Social Change Leadership. Now, since I graduated, I've gone on to start an organization right here in Raleigh that I'm so proud to say has helped over 50,000 people find volunteer opportunities, helping hundreds of causes. I've had the honor of speaking across the country about change making and how to create a social impact. And I have had the honor of educating nearly 80,000 people around the world on change making and social impact through my YouTube channel, through content creation. Looking back, I can see just how critical it was to start by asking questions rather than thinking with that end goal in mind, because it allowed me to see all of the potential possibilities around me. When we think of people who've created social impact throughout history, from past to present, we tend to focus on the ideas or the solutions that they came up with that changed the world. But what we fail to think about is that these ideas and solutions often came after months, years, maybe even decades of refining their thinking, of learning, and coming up with those ideas. And they all started with that first spark of curiosity, that first question that allowed them to ask, why does the world have to be the way that it is? So what if instead of studying the solutions that created social change, we start by studying the questions that create social change? Like when Nelson Mandela challenged apartheid by asking, why should we be divided by the color of our skin? Or when Malala Yousafzai sparked global investment in girls' education by asking, why can't girls learn the same as boys? Or when Amanda Gorman asked, how can we use poetry and art to unify the country and create change? Now, when we think of all these people and we think of change makers, we think of people who are larger than life, somehow different, somehow special. But I'm here to tell you, because I've seen it for myself, that everyone can create change if they're brave enough to ask the right questions. Now, a few years ago, a young woman named Brianna was traveling home from work one day when she noticed a problem. There was an increasing number of people experiencing homelessness on the streets of her city. And she felt compelled to do something about this issue. And so she thought to herself, you know what? I'm going to start a food pantry. But something in her told her to pause. And instead of starting a food pantry, she went and she spent a month living on the streets among the people experiencing homelessness so that she could better understand their lives and ask questions. Questions like, what is your life like day to day? Questions like, what are some of your biggest challenges? Or what's one thing that would make your life better now? And throughout all these conversations, she actually learned that they didn't need or want a food pantry. What they needed, what they said they wanted, was a laundromat. And so she started a laundromat, and her efforts were so successful that she became a nationally recognized nonprofit leader and went on to expand her efforts to include hygiene items, showers, and of course, more laundry services. Brianna's story shows us how important it is to ask questions. Questions enable us to challenge our assumptions about the people that we want to help. Questions enable us to see all of the possibilities around us, and questions enable us to make informed decisions about what the right path could be to creating social change. Now, when I set out to create content for my YouTube channel, I really just had one goal, and that was I wanted to spark people's curiosity to change the world. I'm even working with a team of NC State students right now, so shout out to Jacob, Levy, and Thomas, on a new series exploring the issue of homelessness. And I want to challenge viewers to think about, why does homelessness exist? What are the root causes? What are some of the myths that we believe are true about people experiencing homelessness? And what's working and what isn't? And most importantly, what can we do to make an impact? So if you want to make a difference, but you're not sure where to start, here's your homework. Sometime over the next week, I want you to think about one issue, one challenge in your community that gives you pause. Maybe it is homelessness, maybe it's food insecurity, maybe it's climate change, maybe it's animal welfare. Whatever it is, I want you to think about 3 questions that you can ask to study the problem and get to the heart of it. Maybe you'll ask, why am I personally drawn to this issue? Maybe you'll ask, what are the root causes of this problem? What's going on under the surface? Maybe you'll ask, what do the people closest to the problem have to say about it? Maybe you'll ask, what's being tried, and what's working and what's not working, and how can I help? Whatever you ask, I want you to know that your ability to make an impact doesn't rely on knowing all of the answers. It relies on being able to ask questions. Questions like, how would the world be different if we all tried to change it? Thank you.